everybody. This is Tasneem Akulawala welcoming you to Vidarbh Literary Festival, arguably India's first non-fiction literary festival and the largest in central India. We function on lines similar to other established literary festivals across the country, but with the difference that we have purely non-fiction authors in action here in Nagpur. Each year we have a central theme to the festival. This year's theme is non-fiction for inclusion. And in line with this theme, we have various authors and topics that instill these values in us. Inclusion, to be included, to be provided equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded. Inclusion of minorities, marginalized section of societies, inclusion of the differently abled, inclusion of the privileged too. Willingness to accept each section included in this festival. The receptiveness of readers of Majha Nagpur to lend a ear to every marvelous author included. Readers are sure to be enthralled with a fantastic array of most intriguing non-fiction books wound so seamlessly in astounding narratives by an inclusive lineup of incredible authors. Today, the book in focus is Thinking with Ghalib. I request our moderator, Dr. Amjad Khan, to usher the author, Mr. Amit Basole, onto the podium. Thinking with Ghalib, a poetry for a new generation. Mirza Asadullah Khan Ghalib. Ghalib means dominant. एक शेर अर्ज करना चाहूँगी to start the session with. कहते हैं वो कि गालिब कौन है, कहते हैं वो कि गालिब कौन है, कोई बतलाओ कि हम बतलाएं क्या. A brilliant combination to understanding the past and the present. This remarkable book offers an in-depth, nuanced exposition to 30 of his couplets. Like Shakespeare, Ghalib is always in symphony with human nature in all its shapes and degrees, elevations and depressions. The author in focus, Mr. Amit Basole, is an author, poet, and expert on the work of Ghalib. With a PhD in economics, he has combined his love for Ghalib's poetry with his academic expertise to bring a fresh, unique perspective to Ghalib's work in his book, Thinking with Ghalib, Poetry for a New Generation. The book is a must-read for everyone or anyone looking to understand Ghalib's poetry in depth and appreciate the cultural and historical context in which it was written. Mr. Amit is a frequent speaker at literary festivals and conferences where he shares his insights and expertise on Ghalib's poetry, Urdu literature, and the intersection of economics and culture. Mr. Amit has also been a guest speaker at several universities where he has given lectures on Ghalib's poetry and its relevance in today's world. In his free time, Amit enjoys experimenting with new ghazal meters, practicing his Urdu handwriting, and reading Ghalib. Amit has the most engaging and informing approach to Ghalib's poetry, making it accessible and relatable to a wider audience. If you're looking for a new way to understand and appreciate Ghalib's poetry, Amit's book and talks are not to be missed. Please welcome Mr. Amit Basole. Moderator in focus, Dr. Amjad Khan. Dr. Amjad Khan is a seasoned management professional with more than 2 decades of experience in HR domain. He is a director of Cornerstone International Group and leads executive search and leadership consulting practice for engineering, automotive, technology, EV, and manufacturing sectors. He loves to coach and mentor professionals, students on careers, soft skills, and life skills. Dr. Amjad Khan is an ardent lover of life, literature, music, and poetry in no particular order. He is an avid reader in general, but is very passionate about poetry in particular and keeps discovering various facets of human emotions through the poetic works of great poets and writers. A born Nagpurian, he loves great conversation and is comfortable in English, Hindi, Marathi, and Urdu. Please welcome Dr. Amjad Khan.
Thank you. Thank you, Tasneem, for a very gracious introduction. So, हाज़रीन मेहमान मजलिस का मैं तहे दिल से इस्तकबाल करता हूँ और आज हम डॉक्टर अमित बसोले साहब के साथ यहाँ पे जमा हुए हैं. We all here gathered here to discuss the book written by Dr. Amit Basole on गालिब. So गालिब के बारे में I would like to start with कि है और भी दुनिया में सुखनवर बहुत अच्छे, है और भी दुनिया में सुखनवर बहुत अच्छे, कहते हैं कि गालिब का है अंदाज़ बयां और. हर एक बात में कहते हो तुम कि तू क्या है, हर एक बात में कहते हो तुम कि तू क्या है, तुम ही कहो कि ये अंदाज़े गुफ्तगू क्या है. रगों में दौड़ते फिरने के हम नहीं कायल, रगों में दौड़ते फिरने के हम नहीं कायल, जब आँख ही से न टपका तो फिर लहू क्या है. So that's great Ghalib Saab for us actually. And I'm really fortunate to have this session, with Dr. Amit Basole. So while Tasneem, shared his introduction, just to tell you that Dr. Amit has been originally a doctorate in neurobiology. He is a PhD in neurobiology. And then in 2005, he got fascinated towards the world of economics, and he got affected by the problems in the economic development, and he then did his second PhD in economics actually. And his passion lies in poetry, because poetry is something about human emotions, which is his area of work actually. So, so what has happened is that in his quest for understanding Ghalib, when he was introduced to Ghalib as a poet actually, so he ventured upon and collaborated with his co-author, which we'll talk about. So I would like to start this conversation with Dr. Amit. So I would like to understand, Dr. Amit, that what inspired you to first read about Ghalib and then write a book on Ghalib?
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, and thank you to the organizers for inviting me. This is most gracious, and the introduction was overly embarrassingly gracious, and also not quite accurate, because I'm not a poet. I really can't write poetry. I can't emphasize how much I can't write poetry. So I want you to keep that in mind. Okay? In fact, Mr. Amjad Khan is actually a poet. So, okay, having said that, I want to do a quick check on basic Hindi, if it's okay to go back and forth and recite without literal translations. If I can just recite and tell you the words, will that be enough for the audience? Yeah. Okay.
One more thing, is it possible to lower this focus and be a normal light if it is not getting disturbed with the overall management of things?
Yeah, it's a little hard to see, so if it's possible to just... thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Right, okay, so, I'll start with what you started with. You start with just reciting the poetry. I think this is the first thing that you remember about not just Ghalib, but all of this tradition, is that it is... it doesn't insist on being understood. वो समझने का तकाजा नहीं करता है, महसूस करने का तकाजा करती है. It demands to be felt first and not understood. And the most obvious manifestation of that is that it just makes you want to say those words. And this is true even if you don't understand them completely. This is the power of that, of those words. And when you start, you just feel compelled to say them. Even though they don't relate to anything necessarily, you feel like reciting them. And that was my experience of Ghalib when I first encountered him, more than 20 years ago. I was working in a lab. I had a senior who was interested in him. He introduced me to the poetry, and it sort of slowly, it drew me in. What struck me, and we'll talk more about this, is how this person is combining really very complicated thoughts with such a thoroughgoing lightness and mischievousness that he manages to strike that perfect synthesis. And I'll give you an example of that. And he's doing so much with so few words. So I'll just give you a quick example of the verse that Tasneem quoted. होगा कोई ऐसा पूछते हैं वो कि गालिब कौन है, कोई बतलाओ कि हम बतलाएं क्या. Now, if I ask you what does this mean, right? The first line is simple enough. They are asking who is गालिब. पूछते हैं तो वो गालिब कौन है, कोई बतलाओ कि हम बतलाएं क्या. What do you think this means? What's the first translation that comes to mind? Yes. Okay, that's an interpretation, but I'm asking you for the literal translation of this. Should I tell? Any others? So, right? So right there, by using the simple kya,
Yeah, that is another way of.
right? So, कोई बतलाओ कि हम बतलाएं क्या मैं बताऊं? कौन है? कोई बतलाए कि हम बतलाएं क्या बताऊं? Right? And so with a simple kya, and he does this again and again. I'll give you more examples later on. The mischievousness of the person in communicating profound thoughts really struck me. And then I'll say one more thing about Anjum, because you brought him up, unless you want me to say it a little bit later. Why don't you?
Okay. So we will talk about the book and genesis, because I'm not trying to keep it, in a templatized manner, because we are talking about poetry, and poetry doesn't have a form. Okay, I'll keep it that way. So, no, I'm saying templatized. I'm not saying. Sorry. Okay, I will say it doesn't have a templatized things, to go, flow. We would let it rather flow in a manner. So I would say. So Dr. Amit has co-authored this book with Mr. Altaf Anjum. He is again a South Asian based out of Lahore. So we would like to understand from you, Amit, how this whole collaboration took place. And just to tell you something, they have never met in person. And yet, such a brilliant book has come out of their collaboration. So if you would like to tell about that.
Yeah. So, well, you are...
जी 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 तो madam, exactly.
I understand the audience eagerness, and it is deeply appreciated. You will have Q&A session later. Please let the moderator take the stage.
So if you see, the genesis of this book is to introduce the title itself says, the poetry for a new generation, actually. So first we will hear from him about the collaboration.
So I was going to say that you were clapping for keeping cross-border relations tense. So think about that's the reason we haven't met. So Anjum is in Lahore. We were both in the US when we started working on this, not for a book. We were just doing blogging on Ghalib, and there were many people doing it. And Ghalib, frankly, is done to death that there is really no reason to write one more book on him. During the pandemic, Anjum was in Lahore, I was in Bangalore, and a lot of people had a lot of time on their hands, us included. So we saw each other on video for the first time, I think in 2020 in the pandemic. Before that, we hadn't even seen each other. It was all just through correspondence. And he had the idea of putting it as a book, and I didn't know that it was going to work out. So I said, well, who's going to read this? It's all out there in the blog in one form or the other, and so on. So he said, well, there's something to be said for choosing some couplets of Ghalib and really staying away from the literary aspects altogether. So the book doesn't really look at the couplet at all as a literary output, which offends some people too, and I can see why. It's really a social take on Ghalib. So it sometimes may feel forced to some of you when you read, okay, ये लोग ये सब क्या बोल रहे हैं? इस शेर में ये तो है ही नहीं कहीं. इस शेर में आपने ये सब कहाँ से निकाला? Right? So there's a very famous verse of Ghalib, बनाकर फ़कीरों का हम बेस Ghalib, तमाशाए अहले करम देखते हैं. Right? I dress up like a fakir, a mendicant, and I go out and see the tamasha of those who अहले करम, जो करम करने वाले हैं, जो charity वाले हैं, जो benevolent लोग हैं, उनका तमाशा देखने मैं जाता हूँ फ़कीर का भेस बना के. You can do a lot of interpretations of this. He's poking fun perhaps at those who pretend to be generous and so forth. And where we have taken it, both of us are economists, is we've talked about foreign aid that rich countries give to poor countries. and the show of generosity that happens, and how that really, that the purpose of that aid is not to help any poor country, but to keep them dependent, and so on. So there's a very different angle. Of course, Ghalib is not thinking about any of this stuff. So we've taken a lot of liberties with the interpretation, and that is how we have created a niche for the book. And the new generation part is basically people who might not be coming to the poetry for the poetry. They've heard the person, they've heard the name, they've heard some shares, but now maybe they'll see the connections made to something that is really much closer to their heart, which is social concerns. So that was sort of the goal there. And of course, needless to say, I still haven't met Anjum, and the book is published in Pakistan and in India, but if we want to send each other our copies, we have to send it through the US, because you can't really, so all of this ridiculousness happens.
Just to add what he said, so this book has chosen 30 couplets on various aspects of life, and each couplet is then written, first of all, the translation of the couplet is there, then the couplet is written in Devanagari script, then it is written in Arabic script, and then it's a transliteration in Roman, actually, again, of whatever is written, so as to kind of, to cater to majority of the readers, who would be comfortable in any of these scripts or languages, basically. So, Dr. Amit, I want to understand, then when you people were collaborating, so the fact that as a neighbors, both these countries doesn't enjoy a great, I would say, relationship as of now. So, does these circumstances any which way, were they enablers or they were hindrance, or how did you find the whole experience in collaborating with somebody from other side of the border?
Yeah, so a bit of both. I mean, of course, there are practical hindrances, which I already spoke about. But the far bigger thing is the joy of collaborating with somebody from Pakistan, because you get to really see, your society from another perspective, and you get to see the way a common heritage is being interpreted and used in a very different context. So what we've tried to do in the book is bring in examples from contemporary Pakistani politics and contemporary Indian politics, through Ghalib, right? So if क्यों ना चीखों के याद करते हैं हमारी खबर जब नहीं आती, whatever that verse is, right? That so we say, okay, Ghalib is talking about the beloved, and say, why should I not scream out because she only remembers me or he only remembers me, when I'm silent, right? Is a typical Ghalib kind of take. So now we take it in the direction of leaders, and the relation between leaders and the public, right? And our governments listening to their people and so on. And we give some examples from contemporary politics in both countries. So we've tried to use the fact that Ghalib is accessible to both people of certainly North India and Pakistan, and very much a poet who is part of everyday life in both places. And this is something I want to kind of highlight the paradox here, that he's a very difficult poet. When I was walking in, a very difficult couplet was being recited, Agahi Damishani, then I'll talk about it maybe if we have time. He has very difficult poetry and thoughts, but he's so ever present. On WhatsApp, every so often you will see some very, very strange poem that has no meter, nothing really, it says, this is Ghalib's or something. You don't find that happening with Mir, who is actually a bigger poet in Urdu. Mir is Urdu's biggest poet, not Ghalib. Opinion might vary, but Mir को नहीं चिपकाते ऐसा, जैसे Ghalib को चिपकाते हैं. तो ये Ghalib की अज़मत है. Yeah, exactly. So, and Ghalib is everywhere. Manmohan Singh had recited once in Parliament, हमको उनसे वफा की है उम्मीद जो नहीं जानते कि वफा क्या है. And of course, at that time, Sushma Swaraj was the leader of the opposition, so she had a response to that. कुछ तो मजबूरियाँ रही होंगी, यूं ही कोई बेवफा नहीं होता, which is not a Ghalib.
That was beautiful. Choda
actually. But then now cut to one of the recent times when in Parliament again, उम्र भर गालिब ये भूल करता रहा, धूल आईने पे थी चेहरा साफ करता रहा, not Ghalib by any stretch, but quoted by Modi as Ghalib. So there's a kind of, I don't see that as a mistake. What I see that as is a kind of, he's a chacha. And he's also the only poet who's called Chacha, Ghalib. Right? So people, people वो कई वजहों से ले रहे होंगे ये एक so people feel a proximity to him despite the fact that he's extremely complicated, right? And let me just end with, and I'll come back to you. Just this verse that you were quoting, is a very good one to understand that aspect of him. So the verse is, it's his first ghazal in his divan. It's part of that. नक्श फरियादी है किसकी शौक के तहरीर का. The verse goes, आगही दाम शुनीदन जिस कदर चाहे बिछाए. Agahi is intellect, understanding something. Dam Shunidan is a net of hearing. Sunne ka jaal. Jis kadar chahe bichhaye. Mudda anka hai apne alam takreer ka. He is filled it with very difficult stuff, right? You don't get much of this at all. What he is saying is, no matter how much you try to hear, listen, there will be things in my writing that are like the anka bird. The anka is a mythical bird whose defining feature is that it can never be captured. That's the word. Right? Every bird can be captured, the anka cannot be captured. So, mudda anka hai apne aalam takreer ka. My writing has aspects to it that will forever elude you. Right? You can take this in many directions. I'll just point to one. You can keep thinking about it. In postmodern theory, generally, we have an understanding that you can never completely exhaust meaning, right? In discourse and so on. There'll always be something there to come back to. And in a way, he's talking about that. It's not only him. He's taking this theme from Bedil, who was his guru. I mean, not an actual guru. Bedil was dead long ago, but an intellectual guru. So Ghalib is complicated. In his own lifetime, he was dismissed as writing meaningless stuff. लोग कहते थे इसके अशार बेमानी है, वो फालतू चीज़ें रहते, उसको ये जो लिखते हैं या तो ये जब समझे या खुदा समझे. So and still he has got this popularity, right?
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for that. So so as I was sharing that so Dr. Amit and Mr. Altaf has picked up 30 couplets, and the couplets range on various topics, and I would like to name a few, like on asking questions, on thinking for oneself, on assessing leaders, choosing destinations, on experimentation, fatalism, faith. I mean, there are 30 such topics, and which they have picked up those couplets. And what they try to do is that basically to contextualize those couplets as a whole in itself, and then the relevance in the current times. And you would agree that this Mirza Ghalib's was, I think, 150 plus years ago. He was there. And whatever he has written, if you really deep dive into his couplets now, and thanks to Amit and his co-author, and we try to then uncover the meaning or the context to that, we feel that how could somebody be so far-sighted in kind of estimating or anticipating how the societies would be looking like actually. So I would like to start with with first of the topic on asking questions. And I would like then Dr. Amit to kind of, help us understand this couplet, and which says, and this is on asking questions, it says, क्या फर्ज है कि सबको मिले एक सा जवाब? क्या फर्ज है कि सबको मिले एक सा जवाब? आओ ना हम भी सैर करें कोहे तूर की. So I would like to, Dr. Amit, to, just help us understand this couplet.
Again, there's the quality that I was talking about, the mischievousness and the thought, again, very nicely, compactly expressed. क्या फर्ज है कि सबको मिले एक सा जवाब? Is it necessary that everyone should get the same answer? Typical in this tradition, first line often leaves you hanging. You don't know where is he going with this. Right? The second line is the punchline. So, is it necessary that everyone should get the same answer? आओ ना हम भी सैर करें कोहे तूर की. So now you have to know the context a little bit to get the punch. Kohe Tur is Mount Sinai. And the story being referred to is the story that is there in the Bible, in the Old Testament. It's also there in the Quran, which is where Ghalib would have got it from. The story of Moses, who wants to demonstrate to his people that he is the prophet of the one true God, and to stop his people from being polytheistic and worshipping idols. So he goes up to Sinai to ask for darshan. भगवान से दर्शन मांगने जाते हैं कि भाई हमको दिखाओ तो हम लोगों को कह सके कि आई एम द ट्रू प्रॉफिट, दे विल बिलीव मी। एंड भगवान उसको कहते हैं कि भगवान को तो कोई देख नहीं सकता भाई। तो उसको जवाब मिलता है नहीं, दैट इज़ द जवाब दैट ही इज़ टॉकिंग अबाउट। क्या फ़र्ज़ है कि सबको मिले एक साथ जवाब? आओ ना हम भी सैर करें कोहे तूर की, चलो हम भी जाके देखते हैं, क्या पता शायद खुदा हमको दिखा दे दर्शन। so so he has, you know, very impishly kind of taken this story and done this thing with it. Where we go with it is, you know, we are not talking necessarily about the divine darshan. We are just saying each person gets a different answer to questions. So you should be asking, everyone should be asking questions because they will get different answers. Right? That's where we are taking it, perhaps much more mundane than what Ghalib had in mind, but nevertheless. Yeah, so yeah.
So he was somebody who used to question the times, which were again I think were very difficult times for somebody like him. But then he again comes up with a couplet which says, हमको मालूम है जन्नत की हकीकत, हमको मालूम है जन्नत की हकीकत, दिल के बहलाने को गालिब ख्याल अच्छा है. So now I would again request Dr. Amit to explain this couplet.
So this is, of course, a much simpler one to understand, right? And he's unsettling the idea of heaven. He has many such couplets where he's talking about, why the need to go beyond these obvious symbols and the temptations that are there in organized religion, which link good behavior to certain rewards that may or may not exist. So there's a free-thinking tradition here that is going on for centuries that Ghalib is inheriting. And we have another couplet which is actually even more perhaps powerful on the same theme, which is, No, that I'll come to. This one is the one on, such that there may not remain any temptation for wine or honey and so on. Pick up heaven and cast it into hell. Right? उठा के जन्नत को दोजख में फेंक दो. Right? That is the. So that he's saying these things to unsettle the kinds of associations that have been built up by organized religion to elicit behavior from people. And like any free thinker, he's saying, you should decide for yourself why you want to behave well or not. Why do you need these other kinds of things, to just to behave, bas ke dushwar hai. I think you were coming to that, right? Yeah. So we have that, bas ke dushwar hai, har kaam ka आसान होना. आदमी को भी मुयस्सर नहीं इंसान होना. It has such a modern feel to that, right? That just it's difficult for everything to be simple. He starts with again a very non-controversial line. सब काम तो आसान नहीं हो सकते भाई, कुछ काम तो मुश्किल हैं. मैं तुमको एक मुश्किल काम की एक नमूना देता हूँ. Right. ये देखो ये काम, आदमी को भी मुयस्सर नहीं इंसान होना. A beautiful play on आदमी and इंसान.
Yes.
Right? आदमी जो बायोलॉजिकली ह्यूमन है और इंसान जो उससे ज़्यादा कुछ है. सो दैट डिफरेंस, द जर्नी फ्रॉम बीइंग बॉर्न इनटू अ स्पीशीज टू बिकमिंग दैट ह्यूमन बीइंग दैट सोसाइटी वांट्स यू टू बिकम, दैट्स अ वेरी डिफिकल्ट जर्नी. एंड दैट शुड हैपन ऑन द स्ट्रेंथ ऑफ योर ओन beliefs and values, and not because somebody is offering you some rewards.
Right. So he has a very good take on assessing leaders, and this couplet goes like this: कि चलता हूँ थोड़ी दूर एक तेज रौ के साथ, चलता हूँ थोड़ी दूर एक तेज रौ के साथ, पहचानता नहीं हूँ अभी राह भर को मैं. तो मैं रिक्वेस्ट करूँगा अमित जी से कि वो इस किताब से उसको पढ़ के और हमको समझाने की कोशिश करे कि इसमें मिर्ज़ा गालिब साहब इस हाउ टू चूज लीडर्स उसके बारे में बात कर रहे हैं. एंड देन आई वुड आल्सो रिक्वेस्ट यू टू रीड योर फेवरेट कपलेट ऑफ द बुक.
So this is another example where we have tried to sort of bring in the political element, cross-border, stuff. So the couplet is चलता हूँ थोड़ी दूर हर एक तेज रौ के साथ. तेज रौ is जिसकी रफ्तार तेज है, जो जिसको देख के लगता है कि उसको मालूम है वो कहाँ जा रहा है. Right? चलता हूँ थोड़ी दूर हर एक तेज रौ के साथ, पहचानता नहीं हूँ अभी राह भर को मैं. I don't really know who is the true guide, who is going to take me where I want to go. But whenever I see somebody looking like, oh, that guy looks like he might know where he's going, because he's not strolling, he's walking rapidly, I just go with him, because I don't know where I'm going. Right? So we say that this is a continuation of the theme for thinking for oneself, in a way. And the context is good leadership, right? A commodity that is sadly in short supply in contemporary South Asia, as in many other parts of the world. Right? So Ghalib is describing the common occurrence where people readily become followers of swift walkers, or you might call them smooth talkers. Right? Why might that be? Because they don't use their own minds. The confidence of the smooth talker lulls them into thinking that the latter is a good guide. Right? But soon they are disappointed and part ways. They keep repeating this, getting deceived each time because they are unable to tell a genuine leader from a trickster. Right? So this is the simple interpretation. I am ignorant. I believe in every smooth talker. I realize after a while I've been conned, but I learn nothing from experience. I repeat the same process with the next smooth talker, and I don't know how to recognize who to follow. And then we go on to say, this seems like Ghalib is poking fun at today's Pakistani and Indian intelligentsia that jumps all too easily on a bandwagon and elevates leaders to pedestals. Right? We all know this happened in the not so recent in the past, that some new person comes, everybody gets very excited about them and say, well, they are going to deliver us to the promised land, and of course they don't. And then disillusionment set in, and then you write a fresh op-ed in the newspaper saying why you were mistaken. Right?
So, Dr. Amit, I would request you to now share with us your favorite quote.
Oh, right. That one I remember by heart, so I don't have to read it.
Okay.
So, it's hard to pick a favorite one, and obviously the favorite one changes depending on the context, but because the theme is inclusion, I thought I'll talk about this couplet, which when I first read it, I didn't really, I wasn't sure I was reading what I was reading. I had to read it many times. It's an unfamiliar one, many people haven't heard it, and so on. And it is a little difficult. Wafadari, basharte ustuwari, asle iman hai. Wafadari, everybody understands. Ustuwar, kisi cheez ka ustuwar hona is for it to be founded firmly. Wafadari basharte ustuwari, asle iman hai. It's the essence of faith. Again, a typical uncontroversial first line. Nobody can disagree with this. Firmly founded faith, to be faithful firmly, is the essence of what iman is. What else is iman? Okay, now you get ready for the second line. वफादारी बशर्ते उस्तवारी असले ईमान है, मरे बुतखाने में तो काबे में गाड़ो बरमन को. Budkhana is the temple, Kaaba, of course everybody knows. मरे बुतखाने में तो काबे में गाड़ो बरमन को. The Brahmin, who is the symbol in this poetic tradition of Hindu belief, has died in the temple, meaning he is so true to his God that he has passed away in the home of his God. That makes him worthy of what? The highest honor that you can bestow on anyone in Islam, which is you bury him in the Kaaba. This verse is remarkable for so many reasons, and one for very, very mundane linguistic reason, which is the use of this verb gardna, which comes as such a surprise when you look at the first line, which is so full of all these high Persian phrases. And that contrast, wafadari basharte ustuwari asle iman hai, mare butkhane mein to kabe mein gaado brahman ko. And you can imagine the kind of tumult that would have happened. Remember, this is all mushaira, context is all oral performance. People are not necessarily reading this poetry, they are actually hearing it. So you have to imagine people gathered and you reciting it and people hearing it for the first time. So that atmosphere that would be created by this, what Shamsur Rahman Farooqi calls sher-e-shor-angez. जिस शेर से शोर पैदा हो जाता है. It's one of those kind of verses. And of course, why I like it is also because it is such a potent example of taking this symbolism and throwing it out of the window. We have another one right after that, which also is very nice, and it's particularly reminiscent to me of a Kabir verse. Ghalib's verse is, नहीं कुछ सुबह जुन्नार के फंदे में गिराई, नहीं कुछ सुबह ओ जुन्नार के फंदे में गिराई, वफादारी में शेख व ब्राह्मण की आजमाइश है. Subha is those prayer beads that Muslims have when they remember Allah. And Zunar is the thread that Brahmins wear. These are again symbols of faith. नहीं कुछ सुबह जुन्नार के फंदे में गिराई. ये फंदा है, इसमें कुछ पकड़ने की ताकत नहीं है. This doesn't hold. And he has done something very nice linguistically again. Phanda and girai. Phande का काम क्या होता है? जकड़ना. That is the only reason the phanda exists. So ये फंदे हैं, इनमें जकड़ने की कोई ताकत नहीं है. वफादारी में शेख व ब्राह्मण की आजमाइश है. And what this reminds one of is माला तो कर में फिरे, जी फिरे मुकमाही. मनवा तो चौंदिस फिरे, ये तो सिमरन नहीं. So you kind of see the continuity of attack on these symbols, right? And across the board, they are equal opportunity offenders.
Yeah, through various thinkers.
So, yeah.
Through various thinkers actually of the time.
So that's what. So you look at all of this; they are insulting everyone, right? They don't leave anyone out in unsettling those beliefs.
Right. So Mirza Ghalib was somebody who used to question everything. You know, he was a kind of a rebellious, I would say, individual. So, Dr. Amit, you know, looking at, now out of the context of this book, but looking at Mirza Ghalib as a person of that era, you know, what is a couple of things you would think we can learn as a society, you know, for the times or the divided times we are all living in actually?
So, you know, this will, because be a long discussion, but very, very quickly, his times are, as everyone knows, very tumultuous times as well. Right? He is born in 1797, dies in 1869. So, when he is born, the British are not yet, you know, in charge of Delhi. They take over in 1803, and by the time he dies, Victoria is Queen of England. So, he's lived through a huge historical expanse in his lifetime. 1857 happens in his lifetime. He is, you know, the first major Urdu poet who is living in what we would call now modern times. So he reads newspapers. For example, when he goes to Calcutta, he gets exposed to newspapers and starts reading them. The publishing industry is fully formed. Naval Kishore Press has come into existence. It's publishing Urdu books and so on. There are Englishmen all around. So he's being exposed to those. He has good English friends. He has English students. In English, as in English men who are his students. You know, you find very fascinating characters at that time. There's one guy called Captain Alexander Headley Azad. Right? He's a captain in the British Army, and his pen name is Azad, and he's part of the circle. There's, of course, William Fraser, who's the resident in Delhi, the British resident, very high post, who's Ghalib's personal friend. Ghalib has a lot of Hindu disciples. Hargopal Tafta is the most famous one everybody knows about. So he is surrounded by people of very different faiths, different practices, and very uncertain times. And divisive times. So this is not Hindus and Muslims, the kind of way we recognize it now, that conflict and so on, is emerging. You know, it's not perhaps the same form that it takes today, but there are those kinds of tensions. And Gulzar tried to do something nice in his show. If those of you you know, have seen it, know what I'm talking about. He tried to kind of create Ghalib's persona as somebody who's trying to actively fight against the kinds of divisiveness that is coming. So I feel that he is a very powerful aid, you know, I mean, not that we are any short of such figures, right? I mean, we've got thousands of years of history of people saying, use your head and don't be misled by all of these people who have other agendas. But what is interesting is that in each generation, apparently, you need to be reminded of it. Yes. I don't know what other explanation is there for the same theme coming in every single generation. I mean, these guys don't get tired of talking about this. You know, all of these themes are there, you know, God knows how many centuries ago. So clearly, people need to be constantly reminded. Right? And Ghalib is, I think, one of the preeminent kind of resources we have for this.
Thank you so much on that. So, I think how much time we have got? Okay. Uh, Amit ji, I would like to, also, understand from you that, when you started, so now for the audience, so when we say that, when we translate a lot of work from, this Arabic, I would say this script to Hindi or other languages, a lot of things gets lost in between. So, and this is your attempt to introduce this poetry, or more so the Mirza Ghalib in particular, to the younger generation. What is the right way for our younger generation or the younger kids to first of all able to access his work and be able to appreciate it? What would your advice on that?
This is a very difficult question. I'll go back to what I started with, right? That the first thing is you have to pay attention to the emotion and the feeling that comes, and then perhaps you go to the meanings. So I think the route to the poetry is through that. I'm not saying that the meanings are not important. They obviously are, and we are focusing solely on them in this book. But you have to open yourself to that aspect, and then I think the poetry will speak to you. The good thing about this poetry is that the poets placed a very high value on not closing meaning. So they were really anxious to keep as much possible of meanings inside the verse. Right? And I gave you an example, a very silly example of Koi batlao ke hum batlayen kya. But a really much more powerful example of that is Na tha kuch to khuda tha. न था कुछ तो खुदा था, कुछ ना होता तो खुदा होता, डुबोया मुझको होने ने, न मैं होता तो क्या होता. One of Ghalib's most famous verses, justly so, because it's such an incredibly complex verse. Again, if I ask you, what does it mean, the first line? न था कुछ तो खुदा था, कुछ ना होता तो खुदा होता. What does it mean? Just shout out. Yeah, but what is the literal meaning of the first line? When there was nothing, there was God. न था कुछ तो खुदा था. एक और बार सोचिए उसके बारे में. ठीक है. अब उसके सामने मैं लगा दीजिए, क्योंकि हिंदी उर्दू में ये अलाउड है. नहीं, वो तो ठीक है. मैं कह रहा हूँ कि इसके सामने, बिकॉज रिमेंबर हिंदी उर्दू यू कैन ओमिट सब्जेक्ट्स. न था कुछ तो खुदा था. जब मैं कुछ नहीं था, तब मैं क्या था? खुदा था. That's perfectly valid. ये तालियां उनके लिए है, मैं कुछ नहीं कर रहा हूँ. तो ये बहुत इंटरेस्टिंग है आपने जो कहा. मैं I'll come to that. न था कुछ तो खुदा था, कुछ ना होता तो खुदा होता. जब मैं कुछ नहीं था, तब मैं खुदा था. अगर मैं कुछ नहीं होता तो मैं खुदा होता. डुबोया मुझको होने ने, न मैं होता तो क्या होता. Being was my downfall. If I was not me, what would I be? If I was not, what would I be? If I was not, what would happen? These are all meanings that are in this. Okay? Now, I'll come to the point. This is a very important point, which is how much of this is intentional and how much of it is accidental. Of course, we can never really know for this for sure, but what we do know is that this happens very, very often. So often, in fact, and the fact that Mani Afrini, the creation of meaning, is an accepted principle that they are abiding to, makes us think that he is doing it quite deliberately. Right? That he is trying to preserve these meanings and not close them. हवस को है निशाते कार क्या क्या, ना हो मरना तो जीने का मजा क्या. हवस को है निशाते कार क्या क्या. How many pleasures of action does desire have? क्या क्या. ना हो अगर मरना तो जीने का मजा क्या. Now you think about the क्या again. Again the last line. अगर मरना नहीं होता तो जीने का क्या मजा होता. और अगर मरना ना होता तो जीने का क्या मजा होता. ये दोनों हैं, ये दोनों opposite meanings हैं और इसी लाइन में हैं. Right? He keeps doing this again and again. The love of paradox and meaning creation is just over all of his verses. Right? तेरे वादे पे जिए हम तो ये जान झूठ जाना कि खुशी से मर न जाते अगर एतबार होता.
क्या बात है, क्या बात है.
So I believe your promise. How do I believe it? By knowing that it is not a promise. Because if I actually believed that you were going to come, of course I would die. So how could I live by your promise? तुम्हारे आने के वादे से तभी जी सकते हैं जब मैं मालूम हो कि तुम नहीं आने वाले हो. So these are all very, very deliberate kinds of constructions that are done to surprise. I'll leave you with one last one because I know we are running out of time. And this is something that Abdur Rahman Bijnori said, has always stayed with me. He's a 1940s literary critic and so on. That there are two revealed, हिंदुस्तान को दो किताबें मिली हैं revealed texts, एक ऋग्वेद और एक दीवाने गालिब. Right? So that is the kind of human experience range that you find in it. And I'll leave you with this couplet. हस्ती है न कुछ अदम है गालिब. हस्ती is being and अदम is non-being. Being and nothingness. हस्ती है न कुछ अदम है गालिब. आखिर तू क्या है ए नहीं है. आखिर तू क्या है ए nahi hai. A is the form of addressing someone. He's made nahi hai into a noun. Nahi hai is somebody's name. Who is that? That which is beyond existence and non-existence. Hasti hai na kuch adam hai. Aakhir tu kya hai? A nahi hai. This, to me, has always reminded me of that. If people are Bharate Coach fans, you'll remember the creation hymn of the Rig Veda, right? आके उसको पता है कि नहीं उसको भी नहीं पता है जिसने बनाया है, you know, that kind of spirit. This couplet has, he's having so much fun with the language. Who would think of making nahi hai into a noun and saying, oh you who are not, what are you? Right?
Right. So I think to understand Ghalib, I think if you ask me, a lifetime would not be enough, but we have paucity of time. So now we open up for readers' questions. Okay.
अमित जी, ये थोड़ा सा पर्सनल सा सवाल है. एज अ स्टूडेंट ऑफ उर्दू लिटरेचर कई शायर पढ़े हैं, गालिब, मीर, हाली, आज़ाद, फिराक. क्या बात है गालिब में कि वही इतने कामयाब हैं, लोग उन्हीं को पसंद करते हैं. क्या आपको लगता है कि गालिब की कामयाबी में हाली का कुछ हाथ था?
बिल्कुल है. अल्ताफ हुसैन हाली, Ghalib student who wrote a very delightful memoir of Ghalib called Yadgar Ghalib. A lot of the stories that you've heard of about Ghalib come from Hali. So making Ghalib into a kind of endearing character, I think, is also Hali's contribution, but also literary wise. Hali was the first, along with Muhammad Hussain Azad, the kind of Urdu's literary critic in the modern sense, and he wrote a lot. Muqaddamah Sher o Shairi mein he has written about Ghalib. So the kind of status that Ghalib gets, I think Hali has a huge role to play in that, both from a sense of creating him to be a relatable human being through those stories, which goes to that Chacha Ghalib part. I think that is a very important, because we have so many big poets. I mean, Iqbal has the status for many people that Ghalib has, but Iqbal is not Chacha. So he had excellent PR. So that is interesting you bring it up. The PR part, Ghalib, I don't know if many people know, the Urdu Diwan Ghalib is about half of what Ghalib wrote. Right? Much less than that even. So he was a ruthless critic of his own. I mean, he just discarded a whole bunch of stuff that is phenomenal stuff. Okay, so you read that today and you say, ये दीवान में क्यों नहीं रखा भाई? है कहाँ तमन्ना का दूसरा कदम है रब, या रब, हमने दश्ते इम्कां को एक नक्शे पा पाया. Right? Where is the second foot of our desires? है कहाँ तमन्ना का दूसरा कदम या रब? मेरे तमन्नाओं के एक कदम ने पूरा जहाँ कवर कर लिया है, अब उसका दूसरा कदम मैं कहाँ रखूँ? हमने दश्ते इम्कां को एक नक्शे पा पाया. This whole desert of possibilities in front of me is just one footprint. Right? This kind of imagination is there. So the story is that this was rejected because हमने दश्ते इम्कां को एक नक्शे पा पाया. ये जो पा का जो तकरार आई है, that is not pleasing to the ear. It's not musical. Meter में है, it's all a perfectly valid verse, but he has discarded many such verses. In fact, that मैं अंदली पे गुलशन ना आफरीदा हूँ, I am the nightingale of the uncreated garden. That is also a rejected verse, although it's a very famous phrase. So he was his own big critic. He removed everything. Mir didn't do that. He has 6 volumes of poetry, so all kinds of stuff is in it. Right? Ghalib is distilled, it's sort of whiskey. There's nothing else there. And that, I think, also has a role to play. I think so.
Yeah, Jamul kar sakte.
Yeah. Well, I have a stupid question to ask, in a way. आपने ये क्यों नहीं इंक्लूड किया, यही क्यों इंक्लूड किया, राइट? सो जो हम सुनते सुनते बड़े भी हुए हैं और जो आज हम लोग अभी थोड़े से हमारे पढ़ाते समय क्लासरूम में भी यूज़ कर लेते हैं, एंड आई डू फील दैट गालिब is deeply political as well as human. So just for the sake of asking this stupid question, why have you not included that the ultimate famous couplet, Dile Nada Tujhe Hua Kya Hai, right? and you have used this another couplet from the same ghazal, आह को चाहिए एक उम्र असर होने तक, कौन जीता है तेरी जुल्फ के सर होने तक, which I find it is more political than the another couplet that you are using in the same book. And हर एक बात पे कहते हो तुम कि तू क्या है, तुम ही बताओ ये अंदाज़े गुफ्तगू क्या है. Right? So I guess why did they not find place in your book? I know it's a stupid
there's
one.
no answer to that, right? It's just accident what is in there could be many, many more that are outside which can be also be included. Absolutely.
Sir, one problem that many students find with Shakespeare is the very archaic language. This generation, the very heavily Persianized Urdu that Ghalib uses, doesn't that act as a deterrent?
I think that's a perfectly valid point, and a lot of his verses are indeed very heavily Persianized and difficult. So, I mean, therefore, also what we have chosen is largely not that. We've tried to stay away from it as much as we could. But all I can say to that is, hopefully, you will be rewarded if you do the little bit of work of just looking up the meanings, and hopefully the meanings will really speak to you so much that you will want to, undertake that journey. But I agree with you that, and I don't want to say that he's the only one. People have said all that he's saying in far simpler language. Bulle Shah will hit you in the gut. If you know Punjabi, Kabir, again similarly, I mean, all over India we have people who have said this same things that he's saying in much, much simpler language. But there is a certain modernness that comes into him that perhaps speaks to us as well, and which is not there. This sort of, tension between the individual desire and social good and so forth, you don't see that as much in the Sufi and Bhakti poets, perhaps, I'm not sure, that you see in Ghalib. So, he speaks more to the modern person if you give the investment of a little bit, yeah.
Paucity of time.
So Jan, one last comment from my side. So it was really this was my first and maiden attempt at this moderation. तो मैं अगर इस moderation के दौरान मुझसे अगर कोई गलती हुई, कोई गुस्ताखी हुई, तो उसके लिए माफ़ी का तलबगार हूँ. तो I hope you'll be gracious with that. Thank you.
Due to paucity of time, I request Nagpur readers to join the author, Mr. Amit Basole, in the lawns. He will be available there for interaction with you. You can buy his book, Thinking with Ghalib, and get it signed by your favorite author. Oh, already? Thank God I bought one yesterday and got it signed. The book compels us to be reflective, to search for answers to old questions. To be reflective is to have an open mind. Thank you, Mr. Amit Basole and Dr. Amjad Khan, for this deep dive into Ghalib's shares. Now, I would request Dr. Amjad Khan to present this token of appreciation to Mr. Amit Basole. The gift is a handmade painting that has been personalized for the author. We are proud to be associated with such talent at Alag Angle community. I would also request Dr. Amjad Khan to hand over the gift bag to Dr. Amit Basole and then usher him back to the audience. Thank you. Thank you very much.